Good morning. Welcome to the 10th anniversary of the Self-Determination Conference. It's our biggest crowd yet, so give yourself a round of applause. Okay, so never did I imagine 10 years ago after we did the first Self-Determination Conference that there would be a second conference and a third, and here we are 10 years later. So how many people have been here for 10 years? How many people have been to the conference 10 times? Ooh, okay. How many are first-timers here? Woohoo! Well, welcome. Awesome. Were you all here last night for the kickoff? Yeah? Wasn't that a great night? Did you have fun? Okay. I'd like to thank Sue Urban and her fabulous staff at the IRIS Self-Directed Personal Care Oversight Agency for all their hard work on that. They worked really hard to make that fun and entertaining. And hopefully you learned some things too, right? Hopefully you've learned about taking care of yourself, both your health, mind, body, and spirit. And that's the theme of our conference this year, is celebrating you, mind, body, and spirit. And it's a reminder that we all need to do that. We need to take care of ourselves and the people that we care about. We also had some lovely massages last night. How many got a massage? I didn't, but thank you to GT Independence, Lori Knapp, and Consumer Direct for contributing that to the event last night. That was really, really nice. So, every year, probably around this time, we start thinking about next year's conference, believe it or not, and that's usually when we pick the theme. This year was particularly poignant because we lost several people, several strong health advocates. So we lost some self-advocates this year. Olivia Quigley, Steve Ryden, Jennifer Kerr, some advocates, Susan Tess, Amy Judy, and Donna Winnick. Many of those, and many, many more that I haven't mentioned. And I'm sure you all have had some experiences in your own life of people that have meant something to you and are no longer with us. So we have a remembrance tree up in the corner there, and there's leaves. And if you want to think about remembering somebody that you've lost or care about, you are welcome to put one of the leaves up on the tree, and that'll be up there throughout the event. So it's also a good reminder to just take care of yourself. One of the things that we're going to do at the conference, when you hear this sound, already technical difficulty. Oh. That's a cue to stop what you're doing, and we're going to do a little fun mindfulness activity during that time. So the first one you'll see, or you'll hear, will be on at lunchtime. So we'll have some fun doing that. And for the last 9 years, Susan Borey, our videographer, where are you, Susan? Where's she? Oh, she's over there in the corner. Has been putting together our final wrap-up videos. They've become infamous. And this year she did a little retrospect for the last 10 years of the conference. And so we're going to start off with that and then get the show rolling. So welcome again, and hope you enjoy your conference experience.
It's a big word that means something extraordinarily simple. It's helping people live ordinary and extraordinary lives, just like anyone else.
Coming together enthusiastically, no better place for you and me to be. We need each other, all need to be free. Won't you come fly with me? The time is now, the time is right, for lifting off, for taking flight. Take control and we'll reach new heights. Won't you come fly with me? Ooh-wee, ride me high. Glad you're here. Thanks for coming by. On the wings of freedom, we're gonna fly. We all need to be free. Everyone making contributions, getting beyond all the confusion, working together, finding solutions. Everybody gotta be free. Self-direction, self-determination. Here's the place, get your inspiration. Listen to each other in conversation. Endless possibilities. An invitation for collaboration. Motivation for transformation. The destination, imagination. Won't you come fly with me? Everyday lives for me and you. Building co-ops, networks, community too. Keep our eyes on the prize, what we're gonna do. Endless possibilities.
Self-determination is not just a word, it's my life.
I'm in control of my life from the time I get up in the morning until the time I go to bed.
I came as a consumer and I left as director. My life has changed since Iris.
Power for me is to make birthday cards for others and to make them smile.
Power is choice, will, and determination, showing not favoritism nor discrimination.
I come here to advocate for myself and for others.
I came here to learn more about people's first and what it's like.
I come here because I like to have fun.
Networking with peers who are in the same situation that we are in, right, Mark?
I was here last year. I got so inspired I wanted to come again this year.
This is our first time that we came to the conference and our first time that we traveled alone.
I just like learning new things and just bringing it back to my workplace.
My mission possible is to purchase a new accessible home in Milwaukee.
My mission possible is giving everyone the opportunity to live in the community, be employed, and be educated.
Do you think you should be an advocate? I think almost anyone can be.
My message is simple. If I didn't dream or have goals, I wouldn't have done anything.
This is my 9th year coming to the conference.
I voted for the very first time.
I voted today.
I make sure my voice is heard, and the voice is heard of others that can't speak for themselves.
Ooh-wee, ride me high. Glad you're here. Thanks for coming by. On the wings of freedom, we're gonna fly. We all need to be free. Ooh-wee, ride me high. Glad you're here.
Thanks for coming by.
On the wings of freedom,
we're
gotta fly.
We all need to be free. We all need to be free.
Welcome to the 2017 Self-Determination Conference.
So who wants to be in the 11th video? Raise your hand. Be looking for Susan Bowery. Susan, raise your hand over there. She's the one who documents the conference, so be sure and find her. She'll be roaming around today. Good morning. My name's Beth Swedeen, and I'm the director for the Board for People with Developmental Disabilities, and we are so excited to be hosting our 10th conference with In Control Wisconsin and People First. Give it up for our partners. So I just wanted to thank all of you for showing up. We have our biggest conference ever. We have nearly 950 people here, and we are super excited about it. So it is exciting. And we have some of the most fabulous, most exciting speakers in the entire world because they are self-advocates from Wisconsin. Give it up for our self-advocates in Wisconsin. Woohoo! So welcome to everyone, especially welcome to our first-timers. This is an exciting day, and we hope you have a lot of fun. I do want to remind you that there are all kinds of exhibits out in the hallway, and you can get all kinds of great information about different programs and opportunities in Wisconsin. So spend some time there. And then in the way back of this room, we have more than 25 different self-advocates who run their own businesses, and they've brought everything you can think of for your holiday purchasing needs. So if you have a $5 coupon from last night, or if you have cash, or if you just like to window shop, be sure and stop by the vendors as well. Now I have a question for everyone. I want to ask the audience, how many of you have ever been told no when you knew you could really do something? Raise your hand high if you've ever been told no. Even if you knew you could do it. Right. Too many of us and too many people in our society are told no too often. Maybe it's because they have a disability. Maybe it's because of the color of their skin or the language they speak. Maybe it's because of their gender. Well, our next keynote speaker is going to talk with us now about how all of us can stand up to the word no. I want to welcome Segashus Levingston, and she says that she learned something very important at a very early age from an African-American mom and who has 4 kids and who had a severe disability. This mother told her, never accept no from someone not authorized to tell you no. Segashus is going to tell some stories, she's going to share some strategies, and she's going to invite everyone in this room to embrace the power of not being powerless. She's going to help all of us learn how to refuse to accept the word no. So it's my pleasure to welcome Segashus Levingston. Just a little clip.
Good morning, you all. Thank you for having me here. It's such an honor. I was looking at the video and I was just so moved by what it means to be here today. So moved by the power that's in this room. And I thank you for allowing me to spend time with you all today. And hopefully, you all can get a little bit from me, because I've already gotten so much in the little time that I've been here with you. So when I gave the opening speech for the Women's March in January, my laptop I went to print the speech and we couldn't get it printed, and then we lost half of the speech from my phone, and so I had to really wing it, and I didn't know what to say. On my way up to that stage talking in front of 100,000 folks, I had to figure out how I was going to end. And so I ended in a way that had carried me for many years, and it was from the advice of a woman who was in my community. She was a single mom. She had 4 children, and she was struggling with a severe physical disability. And she had taught us, all the kids in the community, to never accept no from someone who's not authorized to tell you no. And at that very early age, I learned what it meant to have power. Being powerful or not being powerless, I learned, was something as simple as being in a grocery store when someone tries to tell you that you can't have something or something isn't in stock, and being able to say, or if someone mistreats you, saying to that person, excuse me, may I connect with your manager? And just being able to know that there is someone higher than that person, someone higher than that person. At an early age, that lesson carried me. So I wanted to give you that context before I go into the work that we're about to do today. Last year, in July, I was raising $25,000 for a book project. And as I was raising that money, we learned about the deaths of two men, Alton Sterling and Philando Castile. At that moment, my life changed because it was the first time I'd actually seen on television someone in real life lose their life. And my Facebook page was flooded with all kinds of messages, and I didn't know what to say. I didn't know what to do. And then this message came in last night. It had come in one night on my blog, on my Facebook, and I remember my own sense of powerlessness. So I wrote on my blog, restlessness. I couldn't sleep last night thinking about a post a mother left on my Facebook wall. This is what it said. Infamous mothers, I am a brown woman, a mother, and I am so angry I can hardly manage. Brown folk are being murdered in the street, killed by police that are trained only to kill, murdered by those who continually hide behind the guise of keeping the peace, when they themselves terrorize our brown sons and daughters. I am angry and tired, and you know how it is when mama is angry and tired. My spirit is screaming for justice. And I don't mean just us shot in the street. I mean justice. Hold the police accountable because people are dead and more will die. Stop police brutality. Thank you, infamous mothers, for indulging this mother. I'm sick and tired. I'm grieved. I'm vexed. I'm. The deaths of Alton Sterling and Philando Castile came right in the middle of our Kickstarter campaign. And although I knew this woman was venting and expressing her frustration, I needed to read her words as a call to action. In light of these deaths, my focus shifted. I suspended campaigning for the moment because it was not only unethical to continue, but necessary to pause and listen. Here is what I heard. Black mothers are hurting. My timeline is flooded with videos of red eyes and wet faces. Women are unloading images of their chubby-cheeked brown sons. Pictures of boy children are accompanied by the hashtag, Their Lives Matter. I see photos of serious African-American faced mothers desperately and protectively hugging their little ones. Posts ranging from, I can't keep calm, my sons are black, to I'm ready to kill and be killed, are showing up in my news feed. Something is about to happen. We know from history that a fed-up mother is a force. And don't let her be infamous. Think Sojourner Truth, Harriet Jacobs, Ida B. Wells. Think Diane Nash, a civil rights activist and strategist who chose imprisonment over putting up bond. She was tired of a system that unjustly locked up black bodies, a system that then required those same bodies to pay the bill for this humiliation. So she, along with other protesters, flooded the jails. I can no longer cooperate with the evil and corrupt court system of this state, since my child will be a black child born in Mississippi. Whether I am in jail or not, he will be born in prison. At 4 months pregnant, she was sentenced to 2 years, willingly choosing jail time over paying for a fake freedom. She said, I believe that if I go to jail now, it may hasten that day when my child and all children will be free, not only on the day of their birth, but for all of their lives. Nash only stayed in prison a short time before she was released, but her stance is still relevant today. Her words then, we feel that if we pay these fines, we'll be contributing to and supporting the injustice and immoral practices that have been performed in the arrest and conviction of the defendants. Our words now, infamous mothers and all of our allies feel that if we fill in the blank, we will be contributing to and supporting the violence and unjust practices that have led to the murder of our children. Our response to this violence begins with whatever goes in that blank. It begins with us strategically challenging an aspect of the system that contributes to the murder of our children. It begins with us making that challenge our policy and naming it. Nash and her allies call their policy jail without bail. What would we call ours? I ended that post with saying we are not powerless. 1 year later, I found myself struggling with the words that I had written a year before. I was skeptical. Mothers were still posting about the deaths of their children. I was crushed by the weight of our political climate, budget cuts to health care, threats of nuclear destruction. I could take on police brutality, but weapons of mass destruction? So many people were looking to me to do that thing I did last year where I showed up and I inspired and I encouraged, but I had nothing to give. For the first time in a very long time, I felt small. I had become aware of my own limitations. My black girl magic was gone. If you heard me speak before, you know I have no problem telling you that I am a titan, a unicorn, a conjure woman. I can turn something into nothing, alter gravity, make rain into sun. I am powerful. I own that because I am, unapologetically, and so are you, if you believe it. But in the face of all that despair, anxiety, the barrage of fear, I shrunk. I no longer had the ability to turn rain into the sun. I was no unicorn. I had become small, an 8-year-old girl in my great-aunt's living room. I was listening to her stories about Pearl Harbor and bombings, her graphic details. I was listening to the news and General Hospital. I was thrusted in worlds of pain and fear and horror, and I was afraid. The titan, the Amazon, the giant in me, cowered in the face of the girl in me. Why was that? I need to tell you a little bit about my Aunt Merle, the woman who was my caretaker at the time, in order for you to really understand what was happening. My Aunt Merle, she was a feisty woman. She wore wigs. She drank her Pepsi every day. She watched her soaps. She sang. Her voice was beautiful. And she had severe arthritis to the point where it was debilitating. It was hard for her to walk and move. Yet, she would sit in her chair and tell me amazing stories. Stories about her youth, stories about her life, stories about her families. And one of the things that she told me was that she was born with a veil over her face. She told me that she was psychic. And I believed her. And I accepted all of her talk about war and bombs and treachery and deceit and the world as an awful place. And I started having nightmares. I started feeling powerless. I started arranging bomb drills at my school because I didn't know what to do with that energy. And so I started mobilizing other folks to act out on my own fears. And then I remembered as an adult, wow, maybe if I do that thing that I did as a kid, I could stop feeling so powerless. Maybe if I could mobilize other people around these fears and these anxieties, maybe I could stop feeling so powerless. But I couldn't move. I realized that the reason why I could not move was not because I didn't have the power or the ability. I couldn't move because the thoughts in my head had arrested me. They had pushed me into the corner of my own mind, and I was being bullied by those terrors and those ideas. I had shrunk. And then I began to understand that two things were at play here. The first thing that was at play was that my internal environment, my mind was being controlled by someone else. Although my auntie struggled with walking, She had the ability to create worlds with her mind, and the world that she created in her mind had become the world that I started to live in. It manifested itself in real time. And in doing so, I started to operate and become a character in the life that she was creating for me. I also realized that I had given up my right to be the gatekeeper of my own thoughts. By allowing her to take over my own mental space and allowing her to take over my mind, I had no longer had the will to control my actions or the directions in life I was moving in, because she had become the controller of the things inside of my head. My actions were dictated by her thoughts. And I don't think that you fully understand what I'm trying to say to you. I was in the world that she created, and it was lonely, and it was cold, and it was deathly. And since it was not my world, there was no way I was going to survive in it. And then it became clear to me, the Titan, the Amazon, the giant in me, the shrinking 8-year-old, the version of me that was younger, that if I was going to survive, if I was going to make it through what I was going through, I had to do something different. I had to not give in to the hype about how scary and mean and evil the world is, and I had to create something different for myself. Now, I want you to think about this. At this time, I'm struggling. I was a 38-year-old woman, and I had given up my right to be that 38-year-old woman who had already survived this. For me to be as afraid as I was, I had given up my right to live in the now and to celebrate the fact that I had already overcome that fear. And I had chosen to go back in time and become that 8-year-old girl again. I want you to think about citizenship. Often when we choose to live in another country, what we're saying is, I give up my right to live in this country, and vice versa. So when I had chosen to give up my right to celebrate and acknowledge the fact that I had already overcome these same fears years ago, 30 years ago, what I was telling myself was, I was giving authority to that 8-year-old version of me. And because I had given her the authority, it was only her that could help me out of this situation. And so I remembered going through that and saying to myself one night, after waking up with so many nightmares, telling my mom, Mom, I need you to find me a new place, a new caretaker. And if you can't find me a new caretaker, I need to become a latchkey kid. But I can't go back to that house. I can't go back to that house because there's something happening in that world that's controlling my actions. Even though this woman is not moving and she's not touching me and she's singing sweet songs, I can't control. She has more say-so over me than I have over me. And my mom pulled me out of that environment. And before I knew it, I started sewing clothes. And I started writing poetry. And I had gained control over the world that was in my head. So why am I telling you this today? At a conference about self-determination and a talk about how we're not powerless, I'm telling you this because as an 8-year-old, I understood very early that while I may not be able to control the circumstances around me, while I may not be able to control adults or my caretakers, what I can control is what happens in my mind. And I may not be able to control everything that happens in my mind, but for the little bit that I could control, I was willing to take ownership of that. And I noticed my outcome started to change. When I was no longer concerned about wars and bombs and Merle's world, when I started being concerned about the ways in which I can create and the power that I have, I noticed that my reality started to change. This brings me to the next point. I told you that part of me shifting my experience and moving from a place of feeling afraid and powerless to a place of feeling more powerful was shifting the way that I thought and shifting what thoughts or who controlled my thoughts. As an adult, I had to shut down my Facebook page for a while. I had to stop talking to my aunts and my family members who were talking about the end of the world and all of these things that started to threaten my own self-care, my own mental health. And I had to really focus on the things that mattered to me, that was beautiful in the world to me. But to do that was difficult. It was difficult initially because I had forgotten the very thing that at one time had given me hope. What was not said in my introduction is that I'm a single mom. I have 6 children by 4 different dads. I come from extreme poverty. I have been sexually assaulted. I have been left for dead. More times than not, I struggle with suicide, the thought of taking my own life. And more times than not, I found myself rocking back and forth in the middle of the night, on the edge of my own sanity. And as I moved through the world and as I survived each encounter, I pushed through the difficult circumstances, and I realized that I was not seeing other women like me. I was in a PhD program at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I didn't see other women who were single moms with 6 kids by 4 different dads who had come from extreme poverty. And what that told me is that because people like me weren't there, that means that the institution had never had to think about people like me. It meant that they hadn't had to think about how to accommodate and support people like me. And so if I had taken my own life, with me had died all of the headway we have making so far, all of the challenges that we have faced. If I had have not survived and kept pushing, with me would have died new possibilities and hope. So I had to keep pushing. And I realized somewhere along the lines as I struggled that not only were people unaware of who I am or what I had gone through, if I had have not made it through the night, with me would have died the roadmap for other people like me to come behind me. And so I had to live. And I made up my mind to live. That determination started with a sense of obligation and responsibility. But from that obligation and responsibility, it evolved into something a little bit stronger. It evolved into me understanding that I had the right to be here. What I haven't told you is that I struggle with my own invisible disability. With my disability, it's hard for me to manage time properly in my head. It's hard for me to organize things. I struggle with severe dyslexia. And so there I was in a PhD program in literature, and I couldn't make the letters sit still on the page. I couldn't sit through the lectures because it was hard for me to stay seated. And I couldn't figure out this time thing. My purse was overflowing with papers that I couldn't manage. My life, I couldn't find keys, I couldn't find my shoes, I couldn't make it out the door because the part of my brain that deals with executive functioning was underdeveloped, and I was struggling. And so in addition to dealing with domestic violence and sexual assault and having 6 kids by 4 different dads and coming from extreme poverty, I had this thing going on in my mind that I couldn't control. And I remember one day showing up for a meeting. It was a half an hour meeting, and I had gotten there 20 minutes late. And the professor said, "You are hands down the best we have on staff. Number 1, top notch. But because you can't seem to get this time thing right, I would take someone who was less qualified over you any day. And I remember smiling and nodding my head and saying, I understand. And I remember walking out of her office and going up one flight of stairs and going into another professor's office and crying uncontrollably. Because what they couldn't understand is that my struggle with being late wasn't that I was lazy or unprepared. It was that I couldn't get this thing right in my head. I didn't understand how to make time match with the way that I understood and saw time and space. And how do you explain to someone a disability that they cannot see? And how do you get accommodations for something that people don't understand? And so I remember that professor saying to me, calmly, but you do have a right to be here. And it had never dawned on me that someone like me, a single mom with 6 kids by 4 different dads, who was poor and who was black and was from the south side of Chicago and who couldn't understand time and organization and space, had rights. And I played with that concept in my head, and I turned it around, and I mumbled and whispered to myself, because I hadn't had the confidence yet to say it out loud, I have a right to be here. I tell you this because that changed things for me. That lesson for me was as powerful as the lesson of not accepting no from someone who's not authorized to tell you no. That lesson for me was as powerful as learning how to control the thoughts that came in and out of my head and not letting other people impose their limitations on me and create worlds for me. That lesson was as powerful for me as learning how to be the architect of my own thoughts. And in learning that I had the right to be here, I was no longer shy about my dreams. I no longer whispered them. I started to say them out loud. The world that I imagined, I started to create. And in doing so, I began establishing boundaries and making stands. But that wasn't easy. Because as someone who's a survivor of sexual assault at a very early age, I had learned what it means to experience a violation of boundaries. And so very early, I struggled with what it meant to live with boundaries. But if I was going to make this world that I had created in my head, and if it was going to be sustained, I had to learn how to make a stand, and I had to learn how to maintain some boundaries. I remember being interviewed for a paper in in Madison. And the question was a simple question. The interviewer saw me walking down the street and he said, "Ma'am, I have a question for you. How do you feel about dogs being inside of the school?" And I remember answering that reporter. And later on that night, I was proud of myself because I was interviewed by the press. And I called my mentor. And I said, today, a reporter asked me, how do I feel about dogs being in the school? And that mentor said, well, what did you say? I said, well, I don't like the thought of dogs being inside the schools with my babies. But if that's what it has to be to keep drugs out the school, then I guess that's what it's going to have to be. And that mentor said to me, sister, do you want dogs sniffing on your kids? And I started to fumble through my answer, and I repeated to him, well, I don't want dogs in the school, but if that's what they have to do to keep drugs out, then I guess it's going to be what it has to be. And then he said again, but what I'm asking you is, do you want dogs in the schools sniffing on your babies? And we went back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And then finally he said, it's a yes or no question. And then I finally, uncomfortably said, no, I don't want dogs in the schools sniffing on my babies. He said, what you have to learn is not to think about all the ways in which the thing that you want isn't going to work. What you have to focus on is the thing that you want. The problem that I was having was I was imagining a world with the options and possibilities that were already present. And so I was talking myself out of the very thing that I want. Well, if they don't have the dogs, how are they going to find the drugs? And what he said was, that's not your responsibility right now. The only thing you have to think about is, what is it that you want? I took that lesson and I started thinking about my child who, like me, had severe dyslexia. And I remember at some point, we had no idea that he was struggling with the same thing that I was struggling with. He couldn't make the letters sit down in his head. He couldn't tie his shoe, because what people often think about with dyslexia is the idea that it's a reading disability, but it's so much more than that. It's about memory recollection. It's about fine motor skills. And so for years, my son, kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, couldn't tie a shoe. And when he went from not being able to tie his shoe, to people discovering that reading was difficult for him. We tested him for everything, but no one knew to test him for dyslexia. And so whenever he would read, whenever other kids in the class would read, and it was time for him to read, he would stand up and he would walk out the room. And we didn't make the connection that his behavior was associated with his struggle to read. And so over time, the principal said, you know, he's getting of age where we can't touch him. The policies in the school are such that if he gets up and walks out, as administrators and teachers, we can't touch him. So we're going to have to start calling the police. And I remember that question that my mentor asked, sister, do you want dogs sniffing on your babies? And I was fumbling back and forth. Well, by this time I had grown a little bit. And I heard, do you want these folks calling the police on your baby? And the answer to me was clear, no. And the life that I lived, I didn't know what I was going to do. I didn't have the money to send him to a private school. I didn't want to send him to another family member because I didn't think anybody could take care of my son the way that I could. And so I couldn't focus on all the things that were my limitations or the constraints in my life. I had to focus on the vision that I had and what I wanted. And what I wanted was for my son to feel safe. I wanted my son to feel secure. And I wanted my son to not be pipelined from the school to prison industry. And so I did what so many folks advised against. I started homeschooling him. And when I started homeschooling him, I started creating a world that made it possible for me to do the things that I needed to do. My whole world shifted because I made that one choice, and I created something from nothing. And during that time, I started to build a business. And I had the Kickstarter campaign going, and I met a woman who pledged to my Kickstarter campaign, and she called me to come into her office. She said, if I'm going to give you this $100 for this campaign, you better come meet me. I want to know who you are, and I need you to know who I am. I went to her office, and I started reading these books. And I said, these stories, this thing that's in these books sounds like my son. And it was the first time that I had been exposed to what it means to be dyslexic. And in me making a choice to not accept no from a school system that was trying to tell me no, and in me being confident that I didn't want my son being pipelined from the school to prison industry, I brought my son home, and I figured out the thing that the educators couldn't figure out, what the specialists couldn't figure out. I figured out that my son had dyslexia. Well, why is that important? Because in me doing the impossible, and me not trusting, and me not saying, well, this is the way it's always been done, I was able to solve a problem that no one else could solve. What I'm here to tell you is that you have that same power. Whatever limitations someone is placing on you right now, my question to you is, sister, brother, do you like the way that feels? And if you say, well, you know, I don't like the way it feels, but this is the only, no, that's not my question. My question is, do you like the way that feels? Do you like the space that these other people are taking up in your head? Do you like the limitations that people are placing on you? Because if you don't, then it's okay to own that. In learning to build my own business, let me back up. As a graduate student at the University of Wisconsin-Madison, I had to make a choice about my son, but I also had to make a choice about my research. I was studying feminism, and in that literature, there weren't stories about women like me. There weren't stories about single moms with 6 kids by 4 different men from the south side of Chicago who were in poverty. And the stories that they did tell about women like me, they were all about charity. Oh, this poor woman. Oh, she needs to be saved by us. Oh, look at how limited she is. And I said, but that's not my story. I don't need to be saved by you. I could use your support. I could use you as allies. I need some resources. But I think I'm powerful enough, if given the space and the opportunity, to manage some things on my own. And so I wanted to carve out a space in the literature for women like me. I wanted to create a platform that gave these women a voice. And I remember my advisor telling me, well, how are you going to ask me, well, how are you going to do it? And I said, I'm going to write a book. And she said, but how are you going to write a book? You're a single mom with 6 kids from the south side of Chicago. You're a PhD student. You're poor. Finish your PhD and make enough money, and then if you want to write a book, go ahead and write this book. And I said, no. I want these women's stories to be in the archives of all universities because their stories matter. These stories about women who were sex workers, women who are struggling with mental illness, women who are struggling with substance abuse, and who have somehow managed to overcome all of their circumstances, women who are single moms. I wanted the stories about the ways in which they make a difference in our society to be in the literature that folks read. And she said, but you're too poor, and you have too many children, and you have that thing going on in your head where you can't manage time, and you struggle with keeping the letters on the page, and then you have a son just like you. Why don't you just go ahead and finish the program and make enough money and be okay so that you can manage? And I said, that's your limitation, that's not mine. I can write a book and be poor and be black and be a single mom of 6 kids while I'm managing a son that's homeschooling. And so I am really proud to share with you all that we made that book possible, right? I'm proud to tell you all that people in Germany have purchased this book, folks in Canada. I'm proud to tell you that there are women all over this country. The book has only been out for 2 weeks who are calling me and they're crying and they're telling me, you're telling my story. But here's the reason why that's important. Because I don't think I fully explained to you the type of women that I work with. You see, in me learning to own myself, to own my own mind, to control my own thoughts with all the limitations that I face, in me realizing that I didn't want dogs sniffing on my kids, that I didn't want my son being pipelined to the school, from the school into the prison industry, I made a lot of choices. And at some point, making all of these choices, I finally made a decision that I wasn't going to keep cutting off and amputating parts of my story to make other people feel comfortable. I was going to own all parts of me, the parts that was respectable as well as the parts that weren't respectable, because there was richness in those pieces that folks didn't want to honor. What I didn't tell you is that I come from 4 generations of sex workers. My dad was someone who abused drugs. My brother abused drugs. My sister died from sex working and abusing drugs. And I had gotten to the point that in this world where everybody were academics and they were smart and they lived these perfect lives, that I couldn't function and be okay if I didn't bring my whole self to the table. My disabilities, my family history, my children, everything. If you were going to accept me, you had to accept all of me, or I couldn't be there. And in making a choice to own all parts of me, the parts that people understood and the parts that folks didn't understand, I thought I was being defiant. I thought I was telling the world, you are going to accept me no matter what. I thought I was pushing back against some things. I thought I was rebelling. But what I didn't realize is that I was giving myself, that wasn't defiance, I was giving myself permission. And in giving myself permission to be whole, I was inviting other people to give themselves that same permission. And so people from everywhere started contacting me. This act that was initially about defiance, it was about filling in the gap. I didn't realize that it was something that was so human, that it was so needed. At 5 o'clock in the morning, we launched a website that kind of gave people an idea about the work that was to come. And then on this website, it was us not only claiming who we are, but it was about creating the narrative around how we want people to look at us. There was a quote from James Baldwin. When he wrote the book Giovanni's Room, he said, I had to tell people that I was gay because I didn't want folks blackmailing me with my own life. So during a time where folks was really condemning people from the LGBTQ community James Baldwin was saying, look, you all weren't going to blackmail me with who I was made to be. And so I took that cue and I said, I'm not going to let people blackmail me with the fact that I am a survivor of sexual assault, domestic violence, that I'm a single mother of 6 by 4 different men, that I was born into poverty, that I was born into a family of sex workers and addicts. I'm not going to let people blackmail me with that. And so I'm going to tell you who I am. And so at 5 o'clock in the morning, we launched this website that became our manifesto. And it said, in the mothering world, we do more than break the rules. We're worse than outlaws. We're infamous. We are teen mothers, women with multiple children by multiple men. We are women who smoked crack, prostituted, stripped, and so on. We are your welfare queens and all the things that polite society shuns. But we're still mothers. On the other hand, some of us are respectable. The circumstances that made us mothers are not. Our children are born from incest and rape. Sometimes it's the conditions that shape our mothering that makes us disgraceful. We have lost our babies to the system, social services, prisons, education, and so on. Some of us are poor, others are divorcees. And sometimes we are a combination of both. We are disrespectful, and we bear children under circumstances that taint us. We're not flaunting ourselves. We're just done apologizing. We're done whitewashing or downplaying our experiences. And we're done buying into your idea of a happy ending. We have our own. Our grit is what truly makes us infamous. We survived. And we refuse to let our struggles be in vain. They empower our mothering, make us activists, fuel our education, shape our relationships. For some of us, these experiences inspire our practices as teachers, attorneys, doctors, nurses, actors, photographers, CNAs, writers. We make a difference. Come be a witness. We launched this website at 5 o'clock in the morning. At 5:30 in the morning, Ohio State invited us to speak at their university. There was something that appealed. There was something appealing about the idea that in all the things that made us outsiders in our society, all the things that people had thrown away about us, that people had discounted, not only had we survived the challenges we were facing, but we found wisdom in the things that we had gone through. We have found value in our story, and we found a way to go back and get other women to remind them of their power. I don't know you or your circumstances. I don't know what it's like to sit in the chair that you sit in or to walk the life that you're walking. But what I can tell you is you are not powerless. I can tell you that in whatever challenges you have faced and the things that have made you feel the most isolated and alone, there are thousands of other people who are hoping that you succeed and that you become defiant. And in your defiance, you're going to give them permission to be defiant. I will end with this very last piece. Some years ago, I heard a woman speak at the University of Iowa. And she said something that I had never heard before. She said, a bee does not know that its body is too big for its wings, and yet it still flies. It's us looking at the bee saying, but don't you know you're not supposed to be able to fly? And I remember breaking down, crying when I heard her say that, because I knew I had little wings. And yet, I found myself still flying. I wish the same for all of you all. Thank you.